Hey students, welcome to Chapter 4, Lesson 2, learning about colonial government. Today we start off with a nice video all about the Magna Carta. If memory serves me correctly, the King John that they were talking about is the same King John that's like the bad guy in Robin Hood. He's always fighting King John. Same one right there. Yeah, he was a jerk, multifaceted jerk. Anyways, let's get into the content. So, the people of the colonies believed in protected rights. Things like trial by jury and protection from unjust punishment was important to them. Those are important things. They got these ideas from Mother Britain. As we learned in the intro video, protected rights began in medieval Britain in the year 1215 with the Magna Carta. These rights given in the Magna Carta at the time only applied to an elite few, like the nobles at the time, the lords. But as history progressed, these protections were applied to more and more people. With these rights outlined in, Magna Carta, even kings had to follow the laws, same as everyone else. Now, representative government. England already had a tradition of representative government, which means people elect leaders to represent them in the government. The English representation in government was and still is called Parliament. It is the job of Parliament to make laws and conduct government affairs. The Parliament had two chambers, the House of Lords and the House of Commons. The House of Lords was made up of elite nobles. I believe the eldest son of a lord could be in the House of Lords. And as you might have surmised, the House of Commons was filled with, commoners. Most often, these commoners would be landowners or business keepers, things like that. So the more well-off members of the commoners, but commoners nonetheless. The U.S. model of a two-house legislature, here it's the House of Representatives and the Senate, that's based off that English model with the House of Lords and the House of Commons. Got a little infographic here. Now, one time in the mid-1600s, the King of Britain and Parliament were in a power struggle. Who had what power? They were arguing about it. Parliament actually managed to usurp the king and put in new rulers, and they did it without shedding any blood. This is called the Glorious Revolution, and while we don't go into too much detail here, it was a big deal at the time because it set a trend in Britain that the king, whoever it would be, could not have more power than Parliament. So sort of set the balance there. Now, not long after the Glorious Revolution, Parliament drew up a Bill of Rights. It put policies in place limiting the power of the king, as well as Parliament, and guaranteed certain rights to citizens. This might sound a little familiar because the U.S. Bill of Rights is based in large part on the British version, but we'll talk about the U.S. Bill of Rights a little bit further down the road. But remember, Britain had one first. Now let's move into those colonial governments. There's initially two types of colonies in North America. You had charter colonies. They were based on a charter given to a company by the English monarch. The company was pretty much in charge there. Remember, for example, the Massachusetts Bay Colony was run by the Massachusetts Bay Company. Jamestown was originally a charter. It was originally run by the Virginia Company. Now, a proprietary colony is a colony run by an individual or group of individuals. An example of this would be Pennsylvania. It was started by William Penn. I believe Maryland was originally a proprietary colony. Remember, it was Lord Baltimore. And this leads us into the third type of colony to come along, which was basically occurred when the other two types failed, a royal colony. Now, a royal colony was ultimately under the control of the monarch in the English government. But it was not totally devoid of representation. The king would appoint a governor and a council. The council was known as the upper house, and the lower house was selected by the colonists. So the colonists had representation in one house of government, and so the upper house was more or less under the control of the king, as was the governor who was appointed by the king. The governor and the upper council usually did what the king told them to do, and the lower house of colonists actually took exception to this. They weren't always fond of that. It seems like a point of contention to Mr. Yund. Could be trouble down the road. Picture is not historically accurate. Alright, local governments at the very smallest level grew from town hall meetings in small communities. So, in a little teeny town in a colony out in the frontier, the governor's not paying attention to that. They would have town hall meetings. Many colonists took part in these town hall meetings, and the local governments they turned into. Now, keep in mind, at this stage in history, government and voting was pretty much regulated to white landowning adult males. So, the women didn't have a whole lot of say in this government, nor did any indentured servants or slaves. Regardless, the system of government at the local and state levels were still far more inclusive than, as a whole than governments in Europe. Like, this was, wow, they have a really lot of representation in the colonies. This was a pull for people. Now, the active inclusion of so many people in government would prepare the colonists for the rigors of forming their own government someday in the near future. American Revolutions, Chapter 7. This is 4. We're getting there. Alright. Into economic policy. Crazy theory they had in the 1600s called mercantilism. Now, the idea of mercantilism was that a country needed to export more than it imported. So they had to sell more than they bought. And it placed a very large emphasis on acquiring precious mineral wealth, like gold and silver. As precious mineral wealth is gold and silver, basically. That means the country as a whole needed to be selling more than it was buying. The colonies were a great source of profit for Britain. This was how they were going to sell more than they bought and make lots of mineral wealth, make that monies. Basically, they used the American colonies for that. To ensure that it stayed that way, that North America would be a cash cow for Britain and Britain alone, they couldn't sell to any other stinking countries. They created what's called the Navigation Acts in the 1650s. The Navigation Acts were basically a law that required the American colonies to sell all their raw materials to England and England alone. And any goods headed to the colonies had to come from Britain or go through Britain first. That means if, Mr. Yund of colonial times wanted some fine Chinese silks, he could buy fine Chinese silks, but not from China. It had to go through Britain, get taxed, and then come to the colonies. At first, the colonists were all right with this because it guaranteed a market for them to sell their goods. However, as time would progress, they would get mad at these rules because they wanted to sell, their goods to, say, Germany, who was going to give them a better price. And maybe they wanted to buy stuff from Germany, like some beer steins or something. And they had to go pay more because it had to go through Britain and be taxed first. So this would lead to problems down the road. Resentment would grow, and the colonists would become involved in the smuggling of goods to and from other countries, like Han Solo and Chewbacca here. While they weren't space smuggling, they were smuggling nonetheless. Alright, hey, with that being said, that's the lesson. We've got a lot of British government stuff, some colonial government stuff, and a little bit of mercantilism thrown in the end there, with a little bit of smuggling, a little bit of Star Wars. Quiz today. Let's take a quick look at it. It's 10 points, multiple choice. I'll double check it for spelling errors. But this is the lesson for the day, so make sure you take a good look at the lesson. And you have multiple attempts at this quiz, so do your best to ace it. Alright, hey, that's it. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, have a wonderful day, alright?